Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the Professor Greg Dooley and the Pundit Steve Clark. Men, take the mic.
The reigning national champions are back, and so are we. This is the Professor and the Pundit with Greg Dooley and Steve Clark. We're presented by Nick Hopwood, a certified financial planner, founder, and president of Peak Wealth Management. Retire with confidence. We highly recommend going to Nick's website today at peakwm.com.
You haven't aged a bit. It hasn't been that long, Steve, but we are back. And like you said, we are still national champions. I still feel it. I still love it. But we, as promised, are back here on the brink of another football season. And I'm excited, man.
It's been since the NFL draft when we saw all those Wolverines going through on day 1 and 2 and 3 in the draft. Michigan has got a lot to replace for the next coming year, but there's a lot going on. And Greg, you're going up north later today to do a speaking engagement at the U of M Club of Grand Traverse.
Yep, I'm speaking very soon, and probably next time we'll be able to talk about it. As you guys know, I've been hitting some of the alumni clubs. I love to do it. These are my people. They love hearing about stories about history. It's funny, though, I just did a deep history presentation, and, they love it. But, hey, any questions? Yeah. Man, what's going on with NIL? Hey, what's going on with the Harbaugh thing? Hey, this. So it's always current events. These are my people. So, yeah, I'll share about that. And we always get a few people, a few fans of the podcast who come up at these events, too. And so I'll report back. And if you're a fan of this podcast, share it. Tell your friends about it. That's how we grow. That's how we know you'll like our product. Give us ratings on Apple. And we'll keep doing it. And we'll be here. We'll be here through the season, probably a little after the season, depending on how things go. But we said the same thing last year. The season went pretty long.
It did.
It went as long as it can go.
15 games.
It did.
15 games.
That's right.
And today we talk about the NCAA laughably flexing on Jim Harbaugh now that he's gone. The impending NOA on Michigan football from 2023. The maize and blue representing the Olympics. But first, Greg, the most often question that I get during the offseason, number one, how is Michigan football going to do this year? Pretty simple, pretty generic. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I get the same thing. It's like, this is so great. This is so great, national champion. How are we going to do this year, right?
But what have you done for me lately?
Right. And, of course, the simplest way to answer that is if J.J. McCarthy were coming back, it would be a different story because we have such a great defense coming back. So I think we're going to do fine. To me, it does come down to some of those key positions, offensive line, and how do we figure out the quarterback position. But I'm excited about it. And by the way, we don't have that 4-game relaxed period like we did last year. Now, they're all home, but of course we have Texas right away, right after the night game. And we're going to learn a lot. What do you tell people?
Well, I mean, just immediately when you said, J.J. McCarthy coming back, if J.J. McCarthy was coming back and Blake Corum was coming back, we'd be talking about a potential repeat. I don't think we're in that situation right now. Lot lost on offense. Realistically, I think Michigan could go 8-4. They could also potentially go 10-2. What's different is you mentioned the schedule. Michigan the last couple of years has been able to slowly build with a weaker non-conference schedule and fortunate in their conference schedule, kind of building things up until the month of November where the games came in and really count. What Michigan's going to face this year is something they haven't seen in quite some time. They're going to face 3 top 5 preseason ranked teams in Texas, Ohio State, and Oregon. 2 of those games are going to be at home. Trip at Ohio State and Columbus is at the end of the year. At least preseason-wise, there could even be more ranked teams that Michigan may face. Or, maybe some of these teams fall off by the wayside that a lot of people thought was going to be really good this year. You just never know. Yeah, I think you have to go back almost to 1988. If you remember, they opened up with Notre Dame, and then they followed that up by playing at home against the University of Miami. Ended up finishing with 2 losses on that year, but still finished the year number 2 in the nation when it was all said and done. So first game is going to be Texas. They're going to get Oregon in early November, and then down in Columbus at the end of the year.
Yeah, no, it's going to be exciting. You mentioned schedule. I remember as written, the 1997 schedule was really brutal, right? With Colorado.
That was a top 10 team.
Yeah. Now, those teams kind of fell off a little bit, right, in the aftermath. Of course, we won all the games in 97, too. So, So we'll see. I'm excited. We do hear at QB, Steve, people who have a little insight in the program, people like Sam Webb, others who maybe spot a little bit of practice. It does seem to be that Orgy's kind of the guy.
That is the second most question I get.
Yeah.
Besides, how are they going to do this year?
Yeah.
Who's quarterbacking the team this year?
And it's a great question to ask.
And Alex Orgy is expected to start. That hasn't changed. In fact, it's kind of solidified since training camp has begun a little bit from the insiders that you happen to mention. And welcome people to go to the MichiganInsider.com to learn more about Sam's camp rumblings that he's heard. He's already provided, I think, maybe 4 updates already, and I'm sure that's going to grow to 8 by the end of next week.
Yeah, I've been following those. It's good stuff.
There's 3 quarterbacks in the race. Think of Alex Orgy as a guy that could develop into a Jalen Milroe at Alabama. Lots of physical talent, hard to bring down, runner first, passer second. He's working on his passing game. He's gone to the state of Georgia and Florida to work with a quarterback coach, and apparently things have looked better than he did in the spring. So there's certainly room to be hopeful for that. But it also, when we saw the one and only spring game, which of course is, it's a competition, but it's not exactly the same as the real deal. Davis Warren looked, pretty good.
Yeah.
Looked pretty good throwing the ball, looked natural.
We didn't see Tuttle.
And you didn't see Tuttle at all because of injury.
Yeah.
Who started at Indiana.
He looks like a capable quarterback.
Right. So there are 3 guys, and Jaden Davis is a freshman waiting his turn.
Yes.
Who has outstanding, unlimited potential. But right now, not ready for prime time.
Yeah. You mentioned Orgy. Did you see the drill of him in the weight room? Where
Bruce Feldman's freak list thing?
Yes, but did you see what he was doing in the video?
Yes.
And many of you may have saw it. I'll just describe it briefly. He's basically on one foot on a wobbly brick, sticking his other leg straight out, going all the way to the ground, and carefully picking up at the ground level a kernel of unpopped popcorn, and then going back up and proceeding to do it over and over and over again. Go ahead and try that at home. Not on a wobbly brick. Just try to bend down on one foot all the way to the ground. No. It actually physically hurts your brain. Watching him do this. How is this possible? It looks like he's not even a human being. It's fascinating.
I think he's been doing some yoga videos.
Yes.
If Alex Orgy could do what he did on a balancing beam, I think he would get a 14.
I wondered about that. The Olympics is going on right now, of course, and I've seen some of the javelin throwers, and I'm like, it would be great if they had a football toss, like Michael Vick throwing it, 95 yards in the air. Could we see this? It'd be great. Another guy that we didn't see much of in the spring game, we saw a tiny bit, was Donovan Edwards. And I ran into Donovan at the Champion Circle golf outing. He looked huge. He looked even bigger. He's already a big kid. And, I said, hey, you're going to, just looking at him, my first thing was, you're going to plow some people over, this year? And he said, well, did you see the spring game? Because he did plow somebody over pretty good. So we're not even talking about him, though. And, of course, we talked about him because he was on the cover of the new EA Sports College Football. But we haven't talked about Donovan a lot. And I know there's not a ton of variation in how the running backs, but he's probably going to get a lot of the load. And we can talk about quarterback all we want, but if Donovan has really a breakout season where he's picking up those first downs and he's getting those few extra yards like we want him to see, like Blake was doing in the last couple of years, it will make a huge difference to me. Yeah.
And the offensive line is always going to be a big question mark because they replaced everybody on the offensive line. And the question is, how close were the new 5 guys to becoming starters themselves, or is this a huge drop-off between 1 through 5 and 6 through 10? Don't know. We know Miles Hinton started for a little while in his Michigan career. And in fact, when I go through all these teams in the Big Ten, the biggest thing that I see that changes a team's perspective from whether they're going to be either bowl eligible or a title contender is the depth of their offensive line. And most of these teams that I see, and a lot of them is going to be on Michigan's schedule, don't have the depth. They just don't have the depth in the offensive line. So they've got to be healthy if those other teams in the Big Ten are going to make some noise. Question number 3 that I always seem to get during the offseason, what does Michigan have to do to make the playoff? And I think it's a little bit harder than what most people realize that, hey, Michigan been in the playoff, a 14 playoff the last 3 years. It's now expanded to 12. That should be even easier for them to get through. And I think it's a little bit more challenging than you would think. First of all, you've got to beat one of the 3 top 5 teams on their schedule, whether it's Texas, Oregon, or Ohio State. And then you don't lose anyone else. If you get 10-2 and one of the wins is against those top 3, you're in a good position.
I think so.
To be in the playoff.
I think you're in a great position.
But you have the Power 4 champs plus 1 from the group of 5, and that's going to take up 5 of your 12 spots already. The SEC appears on paper to be sending 4 total teams. The SEC is expecting even more than that. But if you want to be realistic, there could be 4 teams from the SEC that could make it.
So they're champion plus 3, right?
Plus 3. That will give you 8 out of the 12. A lot of people are thinking Notre Dame is getting in. Not 50-50 Notre Dame getting in, like the majority of people think Notre Dame's going to make it based on their schedule. And that's 9 out of the 12. And that leaves room for 3 Big Ten teams. But assuming the ACC and the Big 12 is only sending their conference champ. And the ACC and the Big 12 will tell you, no, if things fall right, we can send 2. If that happens, then the Big 10 is left to maybe 2 teams.
Yeah.
Ohio State and Oregon are the favorites right now and are expected to be in the Big 10 title. Who's third in the Big 10? And, Greg, this card is so far in front of the horse, you can't even see the horizon. But I'm going with this until it doesn't materialize. I think it comes down to a question of Penn State, which could have a better record than Michigan. They could go 11-1, but who did they beat?
Yeah, because they don't have they don't have to play these teams.
The schedule is much easier for Penn State. James Franklin and the Nittany Lions may go 11-1, but they could lose to the only ranked team that they face this year, and that's Ohio State. Michigan and USC may actually lose more games, but they might actually have more quality wins. And that's going to come to the committee. And whatever the committee decides, the other side's going to feel like the committee's a fraud. So, I mean, that's just part of the game that everybody plays.
Of course, Warren Manuel is the chair of the committee. So.
Well, that means he's got to leave.
Right. I know. I'm just saying. But the person who answers for whether the committee's a fraud or not is Ward this time. He's going to be that guy on ESPN.
He's going to be the face on Tuesday trying to answer questions that he can't possibly answer.
Right.
That's a thankless job, isn't it?
It is.
To be on this committee. I mean, that's one of those things where it says, who would like to, whoever wants to be the chairman of the committee, please step forward, and everybody takes a step back.
Right, and I love, because ESPN doesn't lay off on the follow-up questions either, where they try to pin them down on one thing versus another, peanut butter versus jelly, which is, you know what I mean? And they just massage their words to, dance around it and... Well, make it go away.
It may be about peanut butter and jelly, but people are forgetting that people are putting graham crackers in it now, and they're putting hamburgers in it, and it's just it's thankless job.
I'm with you. So I do think it's 2 losses, and yes, they probably have to be good ones, but that's pretty good for Michigan. But the way you break it down is really interesting. Now, of course, it assumes Notre Dame, assumes SEC with 4. But those aren't unreasonable assumptions. So what you're telling everyone is it's not this wide open. 4 losses isn't going to get you in. 3 might, but doubtful. You really got to win one of those big games, is what you're saying. Yeah. And I think realistically, people are like, we haven't lost a regular season game in a very long time. Some people think we didn't even lose that one, which was Michigan State. But we're probably going to lose a regular season game this year, right? So we'll see.
Why the SEC with 4, Greg, is because they are predominantly filled in the off-season rankings, where you've got Texas, you've got Alabama, you've got Georgia, there's Tennessee, and there's Ole Miss, and I'm probably forgetting some. Maybe, LSU. There's a lot of teams that have a lot of clout going in this one. And while the Big Ten did win the national championship this year, the SEC is loaded for bear in 2024 with all the quality teams that they have.
So we were on an upward progression. Obviously, there was a clear upward progression to our football team. I think our physicality, I think our players got stronger. A lot of people attributed that to Ben Herbert, right? And he's gone. They haven't, though, stopped doing that method and how they evaluate strength conditioning, how they rate it, how they compete against each other. That hasn't gone away. So I don't think you see like this big drop off in our development in the off season that we did. That really I think is an underrated factor of. We talk about Ben Herbert, but the fact is he made our team, relatively speaking, a lot stronger. And I think you saw a lot of that in the offensive line. I'm hopeful that that's what we see. Is we see a really good offensive line. There's more to that than just strength. It's it's cohesiveness. It's working together. It's understanding all the calls. But I'm hoping we see that arc continue here in this team. That with solid quarterback play, and we got a shot. We got a shot for big things, and we'll find out. We'll find out pretty quickly.
Michigan's approach to their offseason and hiring is to keep the culture that has worked so well. If you want to describe Michigan's success and how it happened, a lot of people will say in one word, culture. They tried to keep the culture by replacing the people they lost by hiring within and promoting. And that went in the strength and conditioning program as well.
Yep.
Ben Herbert's number one guy behind him is now the guy. And people will say that he hasn't skipped a beat.
Yeah.
That's what we're looking at here.
And you mentioned culture, and we'll, as we always do, we'll talk about NIL, but the fact is we did enough in NIL, and I can share from my perspective some good news about how we're treating NIL, but we kept this roster together, and then some. You've noticed we don't talk a lot of recruiting here, Steve, but people were starting to scratch their heads after the spring game, that time period. Why are we ranked 50 in recruiting rankings? That's ticked up. I can tell you that in big picture, funding, the money cannon is kicking in a bit on NIL, and the pieces are there, the things are working behind the scenes to set us up for this season. I'll just put it that way. So,
top 15 recruiting class right now, expected to go higher. A lot of people on Michigan's board and their target list still haven't made a decision. Get a couple of those, then Michigan's ranking will go much higher because they're looking and are in on a lot of top 100 players overall, if not top 300.
No, it's great. And as we head into this season, the other conversation I think I talk about is, as a fan, we just won this national championship. Steve, I'm still putting up stuff in my office at U of M. And, I got the golf marker for the golf green, that says national champ. Sweet. What does this mean to us? Like, what's going to happen when you get that first loss in the regular season? And I do feel like you really can't take me down right now from this national championship, even if this season doesn't go so great. I'm almost looking forward to football for football's sake, as opposed to cringing and just hoping the shoe doesn't drop on another bad call or, a playoff loss or something like that. I mean, isn't it a part of we're just going to enjoy this season? Again, and strip away all this stuff and just talk about it from a fan's perspective. Because many Michigan fans, highly neurotic, lots of anxiety, have seen all kinds of horrible things happen. It's so hard to get over the top with Ohio. We did. Can we just enjoy this season? Even if we lose to Ohio State, God forbid. I mean, can we just enjoy this season?
There is a mentality of the sky is falling.
Right.
I don't think Michigan's going undefeated this year. So that's part of my realistic mindset. I think where things can possibly turn is you're playing potentially two ranked teams in September. And if Michigan hasn't figured out their offense and how to use their offense yet, they could be in a position in September of being 2-2, then making a trip out west to Washington for the rematch that has Husky fans salivating because they want this October 5th game so bad.
Yes. And then you're suggesting in the worst case scenario, 2-3, the honeymoon is over. Okay.
You're 2-3, and I don't expect Michigan to be 2-3. But if that scenario happens, and I just outlined how it could,
and starting to ask questions about Sharon Moore,
absolutely,
et cetera, et cetera. Okay. All right. Well, that's absolutely. I'm not surprised. I could see that. I still wonder. We're still would only be months distant from our trip to Houston, Steve. And it's hard to take that away.
No.
But the NCAA is trying to take it away,
but speaking of the other shoe dropping, Jim Harbaugh's been banned. Banned, I tell you, from college athletics. We'll talk about it after we talk to Nick here on The Professor and the Pundit.
So, Nick, we're at halftime of the show. And at halftimes of football games, it's the time for the team and the coaches to talk and kind of do an assessment on how things are going. Is there a version of that in your world with your clients?
Absolutely, Greg. In every meeting, we're reviewing where we are relative to our goals. We're reviewing the investments. We're checking up on the beneficiaries, making sure we're tax optimized, making sure the estate plan is in place, and anything that we've missed, right? It's our time to review everything and make sure that we're on track.
All right. Makes sense, man.
Nick, sometimes I do that at the end of the year, but more lately I've been trying to do this a little more often at the end of each quarter.
Yeah, and let's do it even more frequently, Steve. How about every month, right? On the first of the month, let's wake up and let's update that net worth statement. Why not?
Net worth being, hey, all my assets versus what I owe, liabilities, mortgages, and that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
what are the benefits of that?
Absolutely. It's going to be all of your liquid, right? Your cash, your investments, and your non-liquid real estate or closely held businesses, subtracting out the liabilities. And, if cash flow is good, it doesn't necessarily mean because the investments went down that your net worth has declined, because also you are paying down your liabilities each month. But it's a way to become more intimate with your finances.
So if you want to get a hold of Nick and ask him any questions, or you just want to ask for a couple of ideas, go to peakwm.com. That's peakwm.com. Greg, we had dinner, drinks with Nick just a little while ago. Good evening. We talked a lot about the market. We talked a lot about our individual funds and thoughts and preparations and plans and got some lessons.
Techniques.
Yes.
We did.
Got lessons from the planner.
We did. Yeah, Nick's the best. He is going to be supporting us. If you support this show and you are looking for the right guy, Nick is awesome. Give him a call. So we love Nick, and I think we'll have Nick back in studio soon for some new cuts and see what he's up to and what his business is up to. Again, celebrating their 10-year anniversary this year. So incredible stuff. But Jim is in trouble. Jim can't come back to college football anytime soon. That's weird because he just started his
left.
He just left. He's back in pro football, but the NCAA gave him a lengthy show cause is their terminology to mean if you go somewhere else, this penalty chases you, goes with you. So if you come back or you get another job, that's their way of saying no. You just can't leave a program and create a dumpster fire and go somewhere else. This carries with you.
Can't come back for 4 years.
Yeah.
Michigan head coach Jim Harbaugh, according to the NCAA, violated recruiting and inducement rules, engaged in unethical conduct, failed to promote an atmosphere of compliance, and violated head coach responsibility obligations, resulting in a 4-year show cause order. Greg, this is all for Cheeseburger Gate and other violations during the COVID and dead period era. This is nothing to do about Connor Stallions of the 23 season. So I can't wait to see what the infractions committee is going to throw at Jim Harbaugh when that eventually comes. Earlier this year, the infractions committee and the university agreed on a settlement. Michigan is already in the process of serving it, and Jim Harbaugh was not a part of that settlement, and thus this is their NCAA way of describing their penalty for what happened during COVID and the dead era period.
Yeah.
Whatever.
The notion that he would come back to some other college,
No. No.
Yeah, it just doesn't make any
Not
sense.
at all. No, he's going to be the next coach at Ohio State.
Yeah,
I mean, it's never going to happen.
Yeah, it's
he's not
happening.
coaching in
Yeah.
Michigan State. Harbaugh's violations of COVID-19 recruiting dead period are level 2 violations. But according to the NCAA, his unethical conduct and failure to cooperate with membership's infractions process, specifically his provision of false or misleading information. They can't tell which one or the other. It's either false or it's misleading. It's a level 1, says the NCAA. Tom Mars has responded, of course.
Right.
You know,
who, by the way, represents Harbaugh, so it's clearly a perspective, but he has shared some information that basically the NCAA gave them one day to sort through over 6,000 emails, and he appealed it, and they came back and said, well, use a filter or use search criteria, and you'll be fine. I mean, the initial reaction in this, even in some people who don't like Michigan, is like, come on, man. So
I would never give up my entire cell phone record. Never. I mean, the NCAA makes it clear that they're coming at you in unprecedented manners, has more leaks than the Titanic.
Right.
I do not need my personal information all of a sudden leaked to ESPN because everything else is being leaked to ESPN from the NCAA. Head coaches are presumed responsible for violations that occur within their programs. That's nothing new, but it's an important thing to remind people, even if it seems silly. The panel noted that Harbaugh's intentional disregard for NCAA legislation and unethical conduct amplified the severity of the case and prompted the panel to classify Harbaugh's case as level 1 aggravated. Haven't heard that one before. I've heard of level 1. I've not heard of level 1 aggravated, with penalties to include that 4-year show cause order. Included in that show cause order, Greg, is a 1-season suspension for Harbaugh.
Right. So if he were to come back, he'd have to sit out the first season of this within the next 4 years.
It makes him unhireable.
Right. In the next 4 years.
Right.
Okay.
This is a pretty stiff sentence for what happened relative to what goes on at NCAA institutions. But, Greg, this is the NCAA flexing whatever muscle they have left. They're just doing it in front of the Hall of Mirrors at a county fair. I mean...
Now, granted, I am confused. So I know that Harbaugh's second 3-game suspension was related to the Connor Stallions stuff, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
So the Penn State
and
game.
It was issued by the Big Ten, not the NCAA.
Yes, the Big Ten. Okay. What was the beginning of the season? Wasn't that a preliminary, like, we're going to sit him out because of this? I know it doesn't matter right now. What was the first 3-game suspension?
So basically got their NOA. There was an agreed settlement that Michigan made. We're going to preemptively do this by suspending Harbaugh for the first 3 games.
Okay.
And the NCAA came back and said, that's not good enough. We're going to suspend you for an additional season on top of the time already served.
Okay. So it's related. It's just okay. So are we going to talk about the draft NOA?
Yeah, but I'm not done with Harbaugh yet.
Okay. I think Jim Harbaugh's done with it.
Yeah,
I don't know what he thinks.
I mentioned Tom Mars. His statement, I love it. The way I see it from Coach Harbaugh's perspective today, COI decisions like being in college and getting a letter from your high school saying you've been suspended because you didn't sign the yearbook. If I were in Coach Harbaugh's shoes and had an $80 million contract as head coach of the Chargers, which he does, I wouldn't pay any attention to the findings of a kangaroo court, which claims to represent the principle of the nation's most flagrant repeat violator of federal antitrust laws.
Burn. Well done, Mars.
Fantastic.
He's a good Twitter follow, which is where I see most of this stuff, if you haven't. So, Tom Mars, Jim Harbaugh, and by the way, Harbaugh was asked during a Chargers press conference about this, and basically said, "I don't lie. I don't do these things. Those are principles we teach our family. Didn't do anything wrong with any of the stuff going on with the NCAA, including the Stallion stuff." So. He seems like he sleeps like a baby at night.
Yeah,
Steve,
and most people don't believe him. And I mean, there's columnists from across the country that says, based on Jim Harbaugh's reaction in the Chargers press conference this week, Michigan should be stripped of its national title.
Oh, jeez.
National people are saying that they're so mad by Jim Harbaugh's denial that this needs to happen. Pitchforks, torches, all that stuff needs to happen. Now, you asked me about Connor Stallions because over the weekend, the headline from a leaked draft, 2 important words, leaked draft of an NOA to ESPN outlines all the level 1 violations to various people at the Michigan program, most of whom are gone. The questions from this is, how much is Sharon Moore and Michigan itself culpable for this, Greg?
Right. The draft notice of allegations was leaked, which to me, I don't hear anyone talking about, but the NCAA leaked a pretty important document it was leaked. Sorry, it was leaked. We don't know exactly who leaked it. We assume the NCAA leaked it. So there are 3 stages. You get to see the notice of allegations, where sometimes you can comment on that, and then you get the actual notice of allegations. At this point, I've heard Michigan has finally got the summary and the draft, but ESPN got it first. Okay.
You talk about a failure to monitor, Greg.
Yeah, I know. Well, this is so great. I mean, this as Tom Mars put it so well, but this is such a highly dysfunctional organization. And by the way, remember that the NCAA is the group that represents all the schools. So it is effectively created and governed by the schools. It's like a giant homeowners association where you have a board and it operates, and anyone who has a homeowners or a condo association, sometimes they do things you don't like or tell you things you don't like. Well, that's what the NCAA, where they're at. It's so much more than that, though, because the NCAA has constantly dug its heels in on this amateurism. And again, as Tom Morris nailed at the end, is constantly being told how they can and can't operate legally by the courts. And they keep losing over and over and over again. And now you add this. They clearly have this pettiness. They have an edge to them. You heard that when the cheeseburger stuff came out, when everyone was joking about the cheeseburger. You got a comment from the NCAA saying this isn't about a cheeseburger. They're not supposed to say things like that, okay? And then the draft gets out. So the draft is out there. And, of course, this is a feeding frenzy for Ohio State and Michigan State fans.
Oh, yeah.
There's an asterisk that's coming down, all this stuff.
The NCAA is angry because they're butthurt over their losses that made them look foolish in North Carolina, Kansas, Tennessee, Auburn. The list goes on and on. They have been embarrassed about something that seems so open and shut come right back in their face. So now they're trying to do this with Michigan and try to get a win, under belt. It's almost gossipy conversation relating to the deleted text messages from Sharon Moore and how that in itself assumes guilt. Oh, if he deleted text messages, he's got to be guilty of something big. 52 text messages were recovered, turned over, and showed nothing damaging to either Moore or Michigan.
So it was the fact that he deleted the messages is the concern, not the actual content of the message, which they have in their hands.
But people think he's guilty because he deleted it. But the recovered text says nothing damaging. Believe me, if there was anything close, the NCAA would file something. But again, it's a draft.
Yeah.
There could be more to come. There could be things redacted. Mostly it appears the Wolverines acted in bad faith, according to the NCAA when investigating. Still, could it suspend Moore for being a repeat offender from the previously discussed settlement during the COVID dead period? Sure. But over what?
Over? Did you say over?
Yeah.
Contact, no payments, nothing outlandish. And I still believe in the conception that Jim Harbaugh could be telling the truth. That puts me in the minority, Greg. Maybe it makes me naive, I guess, to most people.
It's kind of whether his version of what's the truth and what, but in his heart of hearts, I do believe that Jim Harbaugh believes he tells the truth and does not lie. I think that is really a thing. He does not lie. I do believe that. I do believe he doesn't lie. That doesn't mean to say he doesn't push gray areas. It doesn't mean he doesn't push the limit on things and tries to find ways to overcome adversity. But yeah, I'm with you, Steve. I do feel like, and I've said it here. He's a weird dude. He's an interesting cat. I don't know that we would get along, socially, but I do think there's a good possibility that he really, in a heart of hearts, did not lie to anybody about this. Yeah.
So,
but that doesn't absolve him of having a guy like Connor Stalions wearing a disguise on the CMU sideline and reporting back information to the team, which presumably happened. It doesn't absolve him of that. It happened under his watch, and so there's that. But I don't feel like that's why they're mad at Harbaugh. They're mad at who Jim Harbaugh is and how he spoke to them and or he didn't, right? Yeah, and not lying doesn't mean you're completely forthright, though, either. It doesn't mean you tell everything because you're dealing with the NCAA. Why would you? You're going to answer the question, but you're not going to necessarily provide information that they didn't specifically ask for about something either, right? So
I've come to the conclusion, Greg, that belief has become reality for whatever outcome you want to see in all this.
100%.
A lot of people on Sunday were acting like cicadas. People on social media are coming back out of their rocks and their holes this past week after lying literally dormant for 8 months. There's particular people I think we've all seen. They were dormant. They were underground for 8 months. Michigan fans were living their life peacefully. Now over the weekend, they're all back and they're swarming in you. It's all over the place. And it's particularly Ohio State and Michigan State fans with their one-liners, their illustrations. Buckeyes are beyond outrage that the pain caused their dynasty Their dynasty of one national title was shortened. They're so mad. I'm starting to enjoy it.
Right, but the timeline with Connor Stalions doesn't line up with all the things they're claiming. You know what I mean? Anyway, now we do it too. Okay, Mark D'Antonio. Look at the criminals on his team. Like Jim Tressel McCheaty Pants. Look at all the cheating that Urban Meyer did in Florida, and he brought it to Ohio, and then he left. And look what happened to them. They got fired for all this crap going on. We do it ourselves. And it's just like politics, Steve.
Yeah.
You see Trump a certain way. You see Biden and Harris a certain way. And there's people who are deep, passionate, and it's a lot of the population of fans. You can't change their mind about anything.
No, because some people feel this is the worst scandal in college football history.
Michigan will debate this.
And if they feel that way, you're going to find your own path to get there.
Yeah.
And if you believe that nobody other than Connor Stalions was doing what he was doing, then you're going to find and connect your own dots to that reality as well. And you'll ignore any contrary points of view or evidence that could be dissuasive.
Yeah.
Don't want to be that way. But the Buckeye fans are so mad, I'm literally starting to enjoy it. Many just can't believe that the nation's punchline, Jim Harbaugh, could get his team better. When you recruited J.J. McCarthy, a Blake Corum, and build your team on the kryptonite for a finesse team that gets complacent, Ohio State, I'm talking about a physical football team, and decide to build on your defense on NFL philosophies, which is becoming a thing, by the way. Washington is doing it the New England Patriots way. Why that way? Because Jim Harbaugh told Jed Fish to build his defense that way.
Yeah. And it's very complicated. It's very hard to learn. There's all kinds of signals and switching. It's difficult to do with college, and Michigan pulled it off.
And right. By the way, USC's new defensive coordinator, who came from UCLA, Danton Lynn, changed their UCLA's defense from 87th worst in the nation to the 11th best in one single season. You know where he was coaching in 21 and 2022? The Baltimore Ravens.
Okay.
So, I mean, USC is taking the Michigan approach. Washington is taking the Michigan approach in all this. But the Spartan advocates, they can't say with a straight face that any of this Connor Stalions stuff costs them any wins. They just want to go back to doing what they've mostly done over the past 100 years, and that's take more enjoyment over Michigan misery than the joys of winning on their own.
Yeah, I will say where the NCAA is going is exactly what they just did to Jim Harbaugh. Is they're trying to shift away from school penalties, vacating things like this, and going after the man, and going after the people involved, going after the coaches, and not harming the players. And that's what you saw with this other case. That's what it looks like you're going to see with the Connor Stalions stuff, is they're going to go after the people involved. And that's probably an outcome of realizing, with all the headlines and everything, that it's probably unfair to target student athletes who've probably been exploited, just like the House case that came down said, for a very long time.
We'll be talking about that in a future episode.
Yeah, definitely. We'll talk about the implications of that on college athletics, on all athletic teams. It's a fascinating case. There's a lot of money involved. It is going to kick in here probably soon, but we'll talk about that, and there will be headlines around that this fall too, as it goes before the judge should be finalized. So we'll see.
That's supposed to kick in the 25-26 season. What's left to prevent that from happening is all the current lawsuits, the avalanche of lawsuits trying to upset the apple cart of what seems like a settlement. Again, we'll talk about that in the pending weeks before the season begins. The national pundits are feasting on all this off-season news with Michigan, and they tend to imagine the worst and most egregious scenarios possible and then discuss the ramifications of those things to a point to where it almost sounds like they are facts. And I would say thank goodness that there is a local media that does do their own investigations that highlight plausible alternatives that would otherwise never see the light of day because it's not nearly as fun. Dennis Dodd recently put it out there that the NCAA wanted every email and text on Harbaugh's phone, which is outlandish. And Colin Cowherd called it a witch hunt the other day. But most reporters with their own show or their own pod like we do are having fun with it, but it's not necessarily fun for Michigan or Ohio State, who thinks punishing Michigan best solves their own problems and provides an explanation to their own failures. I'd like to believe the coaching staff didn't know anything. I don't know for sure. I don't think most people know for sure.
I mean, I doubt that. He's on the sidelines. He's talking to him. He's doing this stuff. He's reporting it back to somebody and not just his buddies.
Well, he's reporting what he is saying is happening in the game at the moment.
Yeah.
And so this is my interpretation of what I see. I don't think there's any evidence right now that suggests, yes, I went or I sent people out to these places to do this advanced scouting. And
here it is, and here, let's practice it, and let's go through it.
Yeah.
We don't know any of that, if that happened. If it happened to some extent, though, I still think most people think this is a misdemeanor, all-team scout. We don't even talk about the fact that there's evidence that multiple teams collaborated their information against Michigan last season. And
of course, that's legal.
Yeah, but we're not talking about that. So anyway, we'll see where this plays out. We'll follow the story, of course. More importantly, we will follow Michigan football. We will follow the headlines. We'll have more NIL updates as we go through the season because I do have some cool stories and insight. I actually got to sit in Schembecker Hall with Michigan's returning general manager, Sean McGee. I got to meet the new university GM from a company called Altius. Her name is Tracy Whitehead, and I sat with her. So I'll have some insight and things. These are all off-the-record conversations, but high-level impressions and things like that are fair, and I'll share some of those with you in upcoming episodes.
So a couple of things before we wrap up. One, breaking news happening while in the midst of this recording. One of Texas's best offensive weapons, their leading returning rusher, C.J. Baxter, had an injury during camp. He's expected to be out for the season. It's a knee injury. He had 659 yards and 5 touchdowns in a backup role his true freshman year. That is a big loss for the Texas offense, which I think may be the most prolific offense in college football before that injury. Shouldn't dissuade it from being an outstanding offense when they come into Ann Arbor on September 7th, but that is a big loss for them coming up. And the Olympics are wrapping up this week too, and you had a cool kind of Michigan Olympics story that you wanted to discuss before.
Yeah, why don't we close with this, because it's really cool, because there are anywhere between 42 and 45 athletes with Michigan ties. So this includes people like the Wagner brothers who are on Germany's team, right? We're in the NBA now. So not necessarily active students, but had some tie to Michigan. Okay, so this is a really cool story. So there's an athlete in Ohio. This is about 1920. He's a high school superstar. He's a track star. His name is DeHart Hubbard, and he happens to be African-American. We had few, but we had some African-Americans on some of our teams back then, but very few and far between. And he wants to run track in college. There's a star at Harvard named Ned Gordine who sets the world long jump record, and he sets his sights on this. So anyway, this guy's breaking all kinds of high school records in the Cincinnati area. A famous alum, a very, very well-connected alum named Lon Behringer hears about him, and he's an alum of Michigan. He wants to get him to Michigan. So, Steve, get this. DeHart needs money for college. They don't have athletic scholarships. This guy can't just write him a check. So they find out that the Cincinnati Enquirer has a subscription sales contest that nets the winner $3,000. This is in 1920. $3,000 to the college of their choice. So what does Behringer do? He tells DeHart, sign up for this contest, and the alum writes famous alumni all over the country and tells them to buy a subscription to the Cincinnati newspaper. They do. He wins the contest. He goes to Michigan. Paris Olympics 1924. He qualifies in a couple events. To date, there has been no individual winner of a gold medal by a black American yet. Okay, he tells his mom he's going to be the first Olympic gold medalist, as a black person on the way over. The writing is actually on the ship's paper. He goes over and he wins the long jump in Paris in 1924. He becomes the first African American to win a gold medal for the Olympics. A year later in Chicago, he does what he meant to do. He breaks the world record. This guy's name is DeHart Hubbard. He's a fascinating story. How he got to Michigan, what he did in the Paris Olympics 100 years ago as they're going on right now, his place in history. and finally that he broke the world record. And this all happened, obviously, after they won the contest as an active Michigan student athlete.
Michigan continuing to be the leaders and best, just like the Michigan football team. Greg, we will be talking again next week. We'll probably have more about the NOA that could potentially come out, and we'll hopefully learn some new things about the team itself. Thank you for listening to The Professor and the Pundit, and remember that Michigan football, the reigning national champions. Go Blue, Greg.
It's great to be back. Go Blue.